Hi, how you doing? This is Chris. Okay, time to dig in. We've looked at materials, we've looked at lighting stuff, we've looked at meshes, we've even made a basic lighting scenario. So I think now it's time for us to actually start doing some blueprints, which is where the fun happens, to be quite honest. You're going to enjoy this. Okay, so first thing, I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I don't want you to be freaked out by blueprints, okay? It can seem overwhelming because there's an awful lot of power to be had in using blueprints. But please just take it easy. If you find you're doing something and it's like, oh God, I don't understand why I'm doing this or anything, rewind or, shoot me a question. I'll be happy to help. But for the minute, what we're going to do is we're going to investigate the two different kinds of blueprints, okay? The two basic kinds that that we're going to get started with. So the first one is the level blueprint. And to get to the level blueprint, what we're going to do is we're going to go up here, okay, where this set of 3 buttons is. And if I click on the middle one, which is a list of our world blueprints, we'll see that we've got open level blueprint just here. So if I click on that, what that'll give us is, and we'll just wait a second for it to load, there we go, this, our blueprint editor. And our blueprint editor is basically a node-based system, okay? It runs a series of nodes. It doesn't go left to right, it'll go in any direction you want it to, okay? But we always drag from the right-hand side to the next node, just in case you're wondering. And it allows us to build complex kind of systems using this, which will then natively be compiled to C++ without us needing to do it ourselves, and without us needing to understand it. Now, rather than explain to you a whole load of complex stuff that frankly I would find goes over my head, okay, instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a blueprint system so that you can get started straight away, so you're going to follow along with me. Now, for this to work, what we need, and I'm just typing up here in the place actors, is a trigger box. So I'm just going to drag that and place it here, okay, and I would like my trigger box to be roughly the size of the entrance to this room of lights that we did in the lighting section. So if I look at my box extents, I can increase the values if I just, drag them, see, so I can make them bigger this way. So I'm just going to make them roughly the size of this doorway. Now I don't need to be exact, because the good thing is that I know we're going to hit this no matter what, and I'm going to place it just over the front here, like so. There we are. Okay? So now it's going to be very hard for me not to hit this collision box when I go in this room. Now, if I do a right click and play from here, I can walk through it, but nothing's going to happen, okay? Because this is just an object, this is just a tool. It hasn't been told to do anything. But what our trigger box is going to do is it's going to look for things that pass through it. And it's going to say, if an object passes through me, maybe I should be doing something. Now, what should it be doing? Well, just hit save there. Let's go back to our level blueprint. There it is. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this item here, our trigger box. And I would like an event. Okay, and I want this event to happen when something collides with or overlaps with this trigger box. So I'm going to start by doing right click, and this will give me a big list of all the different actions I can do. And you'll notice there's a tick here that says context sensitive. So it's only going to do things that are actually relevant to the trigger box. Now at the top you can see we've got add events for trigger box 1, and here's a collision. And if I open that out, you can see we've got add on actor begin overlap. So if I click on that, we've now got on actor begin overlap, open brackets, trigger box, close brackets. And then we've got these 3 things coming off the right. Now one's an execute pin. So basically when something overlaps this, it's going to go to the next object in its list. But we also have an overlapped actor and another actor. Okay, so 2 different pins. And these are both actor object references. So these are both referencing something inside of our scene. Because remember, I mentioned this ages ago, everything in our scene is an actor. We are all actors and our world is a stage. So what do we want to happen when we overlap our trigger box? Well, let's do something simple. We'll do the simplest thing there is. We'll say hello world, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this execute pin out. I'll just drag it to the right. And I'm going to type out print. And you'll see here we've got in development two options, print string and print text. So I'm going to do print string, and this is going to print it to my screen. See, it says hello, and I'm going to change this to hello world, because that's what we always type with an exclamation mark. Now underneath that you can see it says development only, because this is only really to be used in development. We normally use this as a kind of way of telling us what our software is doing if we're having problems or if we're doing debugging. There's also a little arrow, and if I click on that you'll see that it will also allow me to print to a log, so it'll print to a text file, print to screen. We can change our text color, we can change how long it's going to be on the screen for, and we've got this thing here called a key. Okay, now we'll not get into the key at the minute, we'll just do the print string. So I'm just going to compile, so I just hit there, compile, then I hit save, and I'm going to move this out of the way. Okay, so if I right click and start from here, watch what happens as I walk across the invisible threshold. Did you see it in the top left hand corner? Let's walk back because it will do it again. It's saying hello world, which is staying up there for 2 seconds. So if I keep going in there, it'll keep adding hello world, hello world, hello world to the print string. Well, that's fantastic. Okay, we have some interactivity there. We know now that this is allowing us here to register the fact that we've walked through the trigger box and it's printing a string out. But what can we do with this? Well, there's a couple of things we could do with it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my lights. Let's just say these nice little side lights just here. So I'm going to select spotlight, okay, that one there, and then I'm going to come back here to my world blueprint. Sorry, level blueprint. And what I'm going to do is just right click, and you'll see at the top here I get create a reference to spotlight. There we are. Right, now that I've got my reference to this spotlight, I can access or change anything that this spotlight has in its details panel. So you see here the intensity, attenuation radius, and all this stuff. Let's say I want to bring its intensity up. So what I could do is I could drag this out and I could type set, because I want to set it, intensity of our spotlight component. Okay, so there we go, set intensity. And then if I drag this to here, now when I step over this, it will give it a new intensity value. I could also do set intensity of the light component, like so. And I could even change, hang on a second, the intensity units themselves. So I could have my intensity units set to unitless, candles, or lumens. So I've got lots and lots and lots of different control options here. Now I'm going to stick with this, and I'm going to change the new intensity to 2500. And I'll hit compile and save. There we go. Okay, so let's do this again. So if I come out, right click, play from here, step in, boosh, you saw that light up, I'm sure. Okay, so our light lit up to a really high intensity, and as I step out it stays on because it keeps setting it to the same one every time I go in and out of that. Okay, that's kind of useful, but now that I've set the intensity of this light, what else could I do? Well, it'd be nice if I could set it off again when I left, wouldn't it? If I walked through it and the light went up, and we'll set it to something lower, maybe 250 or 500 even. But what about when I leave again? Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create something called a branch, a branching statement. That's like an if statement. If something happens, I want this to happen, okay? So I'm going to right click and I'm going to type branch. There we go. Now what's going to happen is if I connect my on actor begin overlap to here, it's going to look for a condition and see if it's true or false. If this condition is true, then it'll turn on the light, set intensity to 500. But if it's false, then I'm going to copy this, Control V, and I'm going to set my intensity to 0. So false is going to set the intensity to 0, true is going to set my intensity to 500. But what is this condition? Well, what this condition is it's a way of checking things, okay? Yes, no, on, off. So it can either be ticked or it can be unticked. 1, 0, yes, no, on, off. And to control this, what we're going to do is we're going to create something called a variable. And a variable is a way for Unreal Engine to hold some information so that we can access it whenever we need to or change it whenever we need to. So where it says variables just here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click plus and I'm going to put branch boolean. And you'll notice I can use spaces in that because it lets you use spaces in the names. And next to that it says boolean, and there's a little picture of a closed eye. Now if I hit compile and save, there we go, we now have our boolean made. Now if you look over here, when I copied my set intensity, I've got an error down here. Why is that? Well, it's because the target of my one that doesn't have an error is connected to my spotlight component. But when I copied this one, it doesn't have a target. So if we just connect this back to the spotlight again and hit compile and save, it's fixed now. It knows, okay, that the intensity we want to set is on this spotlight. Same with this one. Okay, that's great. But what about this boolean here? Okay, well, let's drag this boolean into our scene. Get branch boolean. And I'm going to connect it to this condition. So if this is true, let's turn our light on. But if it's false, let's turn our light off. Okay, interesting. But the thing is that this boolean, if we look over here on the right, is already set to off. So all that's going to happen is any little light our light has is going to be set to 0. And then whenever we go back across it again, it's going to keep setting it to 0. That's no good to us. Okay, well, we can fix that. Because what we could do is we could tell it, let's start this boolean here on. And click save. Okay, cool. But the problem here is we're never going to be able to turn the light off because it's going to keep checking the branch boolean. Turn the light on, and then it'll check it again. Light's already on. It won't turn it off because this is set to true. What do we do? Well, if I then get my branch boolean here and drag it over and click set branch boolean, connect it to the execute pin of this and make sure that it's unchecked. Now what's going to happen is when we overlap the trigger box, we're going to hit this branch, it's going to check the boolean, which is true at the minute, and so it's going to set the intensity to 500, and then it's going to set the boolean to not true. And then if we overlap the actor again, it's going to check this, the branch boolean is going to be false, and so it's going to go to here. But what we could also do is drag this across, set branch boolean, connect them together, and I could turn this to true, and it will reset it, so it makes a reusable piece of blueprint code. So if I hit compile and save now, and I'm just going to right click play from here, and as I step in, the light brightens. As I step out, the light turns off. Brightens, turns off. Brightens, turns off. Okay, now this isn't a perfect loop because of course what we could do as well is I could walk slightly into the collision box and then out of it again and then walk in and the light's off. So this is just a logic thing, okay, but hopefully it'll give you a chance to have a little bit of a play around with the blueprint system and kind of understand what's going on. Now, with regard to understanding what's going on, it's important really to maintain a nice tidy blueprint. So we can move these things around to make things a little bit easier for us to understand. And we can also add what's called a redirector node by just double clicking on one of these lines, and then we can pull them out like this, just so we get a bit of a cleaner kind of pathway. We know exactly what's happening. Now, if we want to understand it better, what we can also do is I could select these two, and I'm going to press C for comment, and this checks boolean for the branch. So we know now this is checking the boolean for the branch. If I select these, I can now put in a comment for this, set light intensity. And then finally, for this bit, set variable at the end. Okay, so now we have these checked and set, okay? It's going to set this variable at the end, it's going to check the boolean for the branch, all this kind of thing, and our light's going to come on and it's going to turn off. Fabulous, we can do that. But this is the level blueprint. This isn't reusable. What I mean by that is that even though we've created this funky little piece of code here, we couldn't then, you know, go and replicate this somewhere else, because we'd have to have exactly the same things inside the other level for it to work. So this is why the blueprint system inside of Unreal Engine is so incredibly useful. Now, what I'm going to do now, pardon me, I've got hiccups, is let's go to a new level. File, new level, and I'm just going to go to a basic empty world here. There we go. And inside here, I'm going to get my big directional light and change it to 2, okay, because I don't want it too bright. And I want to make a reusable blueprint in here. So let's go to our content drawer, go to assets, and I'm going to right click, new folder, and I'm going to call this my blueprints. There we are. And then inside my blueprints, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this light toggle. Okay, so this is a light toggle system. So we can walk into an area, turn a light on, turn it off again. Now, how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need a light to turn on and off. So I'm going to go and get a light. Here's a point light here. I'm going to drag it up. And I think to make it a little easier for us to see as well, I'm probably going to get a couple of walls from our starter content. It's always useful being able to actually see what we're doing. There we go, one there, drag it across, one there, turn it around. And this isn't going to be the most beautiful model in the world, I'm afraid, but it is going to be functional. There we go. And let's put a roof on it as well. There we are. Okay, so now the inside of our box is a bit darker, and I'll extend this out a little bit more as well. Put a little gap down the middle because I think that looks kind of funky. There we go. Right, and I'll change the intensity on this light to 0. Okay, so we now have a light that is not lit. Now, what I want to do is I want to make a kind of a pressure plate. They're fairly common in video games, and they're also not difficult to make, okay? You can probably see in your head kind of how it would work, yeah? But let's do it here. So Control S. I'm going to save my new map. I'm going to call this BP underscore example because it's a map for a BP example. Right. So window, content browser, and I'd like my content browser to stay open, which is why I've done that. I'm going to go to my blueprints, light toggle, right click, and I'm going to create a new blueprint class. When I do that, it will ask me to pick my parent class. So I'm just going to pick an actor, because this is an actor that we can drop in a game. And I'm going to call it BP underscore, because good naming conventions are massively important. So BP underscore light pressure switch. Okay, and Control S just to save. And if I just double click on that, it looks very similar to what we had, but we've got this thing called a viewport, and then we've got a construction script, which we didn't have, and then an event graph, which we did have. Okay, so this is the part that you'll be familiar with from the level blueprint, but over here, these parts are new. Now, the blueprint, the viewport allows us to basically assemble things, okay, so we can build something inside of here. The construction script is like a blueprint event graph that runs when something's placed on a level or when the game basically updates the object in any way whatsoever. And the event graph, it only happens when something calls one of these 3 events. So in this case, begin play, begin overlap, or event tick. I'm going to delete all 3 of these. That way it'll stop it, you know, confusing us with things that we don't need. And let's go over here to viewport. So the first thing I'm going to add is a cube. There we go. So you can see here cube, and if I click on it, it drops it into my scene. Now, remember our cube is, well, it has a pivot point exactly in the middle, which is never really ideal. So I'm going to change its scale to 0.1. There we are. And I'm going to change its location here to, I think, about 10. And that should have it exactly resting on the ground plane then, okay? Simply because of you know, it's dimensions. I'll check that. Actually, it should be 5, my mistake. There, now it's resting on the ground plane. So now we know that this is our light switch box, yeah? Hit compile, hit save. Now the next thing I'm going to add is a box collision. So I'll type in box, and there's our box collision there. And I'm going to drag that so it's above it, and I can make it about the height of a person. So the height of a person is about 180 centimeters or thereabouts. So there we go. I'll drag it over to here, and I'll give it a box extent of 50-50. So it's the same size as this and higher than a person. Excellent. Let's do a save on that now. And what I need to do next is I want to name these things so I know exactly what they are. So if I select cube, I'll call this pressure underscore plate. And for the box, I'll call this the coal box, short for collision box, and also because I always spell collision wrongly and I don't want to look silly. Okay, so what can we do with this? Well, if we go to our event graph, what I can do is I can select our coal box here, right click, and I'm going to type on overlap. And when I do that, if I scroll to the top, you can see add on component begin overlap, and that's an event for the collision box. So I'll add that. There we go. And you can see we've got loads and loads more options here, because we get a lot more options when we do things in an actor blueprint. You know, we get much more control, much more reusability. Now I'm going to ignore the majority of these for the moment. Okay, we can do a test statement if you want to. So what I could do is just drag this out and type print. There's our hello, hit compile and hit save, and I'll drag this out the way. And to show you, I could now drag this and drop it inside of my scene. Right click, play from here, and if I walk over it, hello, it says hello twice. Now remember what I said about reusability, I can drag it anywhere. I can have as many copies of this as I want, and every time I step over one of them, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to say hello, 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 hello. Okay, now let's get rid of some of the excess ones of these for the minute. I'll get rid of that one and that one. Not that one though, I'll leave that one. Okay, so let's go back to our light switch. Okay, our pressure switch that's going to turn a light on. Now, how do we get it to turn that light on? Well, if we select this light and right click, it doesn't allow us to see it like it would in the level blueprint, because this blueprint doesn't own that light. Okay, we need some way of doing it. Now, you probably remember that we were talking a few minutes ago about variables. And what we could do is we could say to it, you know, let's have a variable for this light and access it that way. Now this sounds like, oh no, I'm immediately lost. Don't be, okay, don't be. This light here is a point light, yes? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it light. There we are. And under the variable type up here on the right, I'm going to type in point light. And when I do that, you'll see here we've got this point light and then these 4 different kind of sections leading off it. Just click on point light. There we are. And now we have a variable that's a point light. And if I click on the little eye here, just to open it up, this now becomes public. This means that we can change the value of this variable at any time without even having to open up this blueprint editor. I'll show you what I mean. If I hit compile and hit save, just move this out the way. If I now select this, can you see just here it says default light, and I can now click on that and select my point light. So I have this point light now selected. Clever. Okay, so what can I do with that though? Well, if I drag this into my scene, get light, and just type set intensity again. So set intensity of the point light component. Let's just tidy this up a little bit. There we go. And connect these two together. And I'll set this to a nice high value again, maybe 500. Not that it needs to be that bright, but you get the point. Now, because I've compiled, if I play from here and walk over, boof! Let there be light. Let there be light indeed. Now, rather than, okay, telling this, you know, when I step off it, I want it to turn it off. What I'd like to do is do something a little bit clever and use another function on top of this. So if I get my collision box here and right click and type end overlap. Okay, so add on component end overlap. So what's happening is when I stop overlapping this object, it's going to do something. Now maybe I'd like it to turn the light off. Okay, so I could just set intensity again. I could just grab this, Control C, Control V, and I could set its intensity down to 0. And, you know, as long as I connect the target up to here, remember we did that last time. If I set the intensity down to 0 and connect that together, it'll then go out. So right click, play from here, lights on, light off. You see it went dim again. Light on, light off. But what if we want a delay on that, like a delay switch? So we've walked across that, the lights came on, it's going to give us maybe 5 seconds, then the light's going to turn off again. Well, we could do that too. If we just drag between these two, I could say delay. And what that's going to do is it's going to delay the execution of the next stage. And it's going to delay it by a number of seconds. In this case, duration 02. Now, what would be really clever is if we wanted to set this ourselves. So let's say we've got a big long corridor and it takes you about 10 seconds to run from one end of the corridor to the other end of the corridor. We could set our delay to be 10 seconds to encourage the player to get through that corridor nice and quick before it's dark and they get creeped out. But we may also have a second corridor that's way less, you know, way less long, or we may want to keep a light on in a room for at least 30 seconds even when they're not on the click, on the pressure pad. So how do we do that? Well, what we could do is we could make this duration into a variable. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go here where my light is, because I like to keep things neat. Okay, very important. We've got all these things we're starting to add, all this functionality we're starting to add to our blueprint, and we want to be able to access the tools that we create relatively easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a category. I'm going to call it o1.space_config. The reason I've called it that is because we're making a configuration for this. That's the first reason. And the second is because it lists numbers and then letters. Numerical and then alphanumerical, numerical and then alpha values, okay? And so 0, 1 will be listed in the list of categories before, you know, a category called config. So it'll be at the top. And if I just click on my little thing here, there we go, my blueprint, you can see at the minute it's still default light, but if I hit compile and save in the other window, it's now O1 config, and there's my light there. So it's nice and easy to find. Now, remember what I said about promotion to a variable? If I get my delay here, I'm going to drag it out, and you'll see here I've got promote to variable. Duration. Great. Well, what I'm going to do is, firstly, I'm going to change the variable name for duration here to something more descriptive. Light on duration. So that's how long the light's going to stay on for. And under category, again, I'm going to choose config. I'm going to hit compile and save. And the light on duration, we can give it a default value, so maybe 3 seconds. But we can also give it a maximum minimum range. So let's say 0 and 30. Okay, so now we've got a range that we can use here of 0 to 30 seconds, and the user who reuses your blueprint, it could be someone else on your team or it could be you, is now constrained to that value if they're editing it just by clicking on the blueprint and changing the values. So if I just come over here and compile and save. Oh, and one last thing, I do need to click the little I to make it visible. Okay, there we go. And now you can see light on duration, and I can grab that and drag it between 0 and 30. So let's say 3 seconds. That seems a good time. And then another thing we could do is we could set the actual intensity of the light here. So if I drag that out, let's promote that to a variable too. And I'll call that light, oops, do that again. Select that, there we go. So I'll change that to light on intensity. There we are. And if I hit compile and save, I'll change the, well, it's already got the default value of 500. I'll make it a public variable, like so, and I'll give it a value range, again, like before, so 0 and a maximum of 1,000, okay, because that's pretty bright. Again, we'll stick it in the category config. Compile and save. Okay, excellent stuff. So let's move this over here. So now, what we've got is the ability to click play from here, and if I step over this, the light goes on, and as I step away, if I count to 5 in my head, it's turned off. Remember lumen, so it takes a little while for things to die down over there. But if I go on this one, you'll notice the light doesn't come on, because these things are independent of each other. What do I mean by that? Well, if I grab this one and put it next to here, and I'm just going to take a quick copy of my ceiling, there we go, and my back wall, just drag them out. Whoops, a daisy, wrong way. Control C, Control V, drag, there we are. And I'm going to take my light as well, so that's point light. Let's make a copy. Point light 2. Now, if I tell this one to look at point light 2 as the one it wants to turn on, and I'll tell it the light on intensity this time is 125, but with a light on duration of 11 seconds, now I've got 2 lights play from here. So if I go on to this one, it'll turn on for 11 seconds, and this one will turn on brighter for just a few seconds. So that one's turned off first, and then this one will probably turn off in just a moment. There we go. Reusability. The reusability of these blueprints is great, because what this means is that I can now go back to my lighting level just here, and I could drag this in, and it will use any one of the point lights in the ceiling, like so. And if I just step over this, it'll turn the light on and it will turn the light off. Okay, so light on duration 3 seconds, light on intensity 500, reset it back to 0 afterwards. And this is what makes things so incredibly good if we're using blueprints, because writing that in C++, a whole wall of text would be using there, whereas with this we've got a lovely visual example of what it is we're doing. Now let's go back to our BP light pressure switch, and remember before we were doing comments, so we'll do the same thing over here. I'm just going to drag this delay here, hit C, delay, the light dimming, then here hit C, light dims, then up here light brightens, like so. Okay, the good thing about this as well is that because we've got these now inside these comment boxes, we can drag the entire comment box and move entire blocks of code to their own areas, so we know exactly what they are and we've got a greater degree of control over them. So over here, light component, we can move that over there if we wanted to, and then over here, here's our actions. Okay, so this way we keep our scene nice and clean, we know where everything is inside of our blueprint, and it's reusable, which is massively important. Another good thing about this is that it means we can then build off this blueprint and continue to add functionality to it. But we can talk about that when we go into more advanced blueprint stuff. So, blueprints. That was a bit of a basic starter. We talked about some simple things we could do with the level blueprint and then with a blueprint actor. So I hope you found that interesting, and I'll see you in the next lesson. And until then, bye-bye for now.